Andris Piebalgs, and today's webinar is quite ambitious. We would like to know, is the EU ready for new methane legislation? Just a couple of things before we are starting this. I would very much appreciate your questions during the webinar, and I will try to ask them to the speakers. We have excellent speakers today, but each event is as good as many strong and interesting questions we get. Now to the methane. Methane is something that is coming more and more in public attention. It is responsible for 25% of global warming, but recent IPCC report on science, climate science, definitely has single methane more stronger than ever before. And it is believed that we could avoid 0.3 degrees Celsius of global warming by 2040s and reduce also very strongly impact of air pollution if we address the issue. So in a way, it is a low-hanging fruit for keeping the opportunity to limiting the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's interesting that International Energy Agency even believes that we can, by 2030, at least what concerns the fossil fuels, to cut emissions by 75%, and at least half of this emissions cut for oil and gas could come without net costs. Definitely depends on natural gas prices, but that's roughly the estimate. We know that methane is coming more and more in national determined contributions, the main instrument of Paris Climate Agreement, but still not sufficiently enough. And it's believed that there should be much stronger interest in it. And we have recent development, this announcement by European Union and US, so-called Global Methane Pledge. It will be initiated to be launched. It initiated to be launched at COP26, so that other countries could join. At least at this stage, we know that 6 of top 15 methane emitters globally already has announced. I hope that nearly all of them will join, because it's something that is doable and with very, well, it's not very high net costs. And the idea of this global methane pledge is that collectively cut by 30% methane emissions compared with 2020 levels. So it's quite ambitious. I think sometimes in methodology there is a mission. What is a benchmark you try to address? And this is 2020, 2030, in 10 years, you'd cut 1/3 of the methane emissions. So that is assumed that would help really to limit the rise of global temperature by 0.2 degrees Celsius. But today we focus on EU. Why EU is so important? Well, EU has done a lot. And at the same time, because of the European Green Deal ambition, methane can't be forgotten. So it was already in the Green Deal strategy that methane emissions should go down by the third. There are two major pillars, I think, on this approach. One is domestic emissions. There are still emissions from oil and gas and fossil fuel sector. So domestic emissions are still significant. We are not the biggest, but it's definitely still, there is more than we would like to have and admit it, because now the measurements with new equipment shows here and there we could cut more and do better than we have done until now, and substantially better. So we are still big methane emitter. But then there is another reason. We have global supply chains. And here EU impact for particularly oil, but also for gas, imported oil and gas, are quite substantial. So that means that EU would need to do a strong approach to methane emissions limitation, first for domestic cuts, but also for global responsibility, because more and more legislators in more and more countries start to address it. But what we would need to really to do is that this approach is being widespread, and the attention to EU is quite particular, not only because of methane, but particularly because of EU ambition really to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So today's event we have divided in 3 sessions. One is political session with Kitti, Nyitrai from European Commission, Nicolás González Casares from European Parliament, Urška, Dolinšek from Slovenian Presidency. That is where actually the legislative proposal comes from, and the ones that really need to agree on it. Then the second block is on regulatory. Marco Lacognata from ARERA and SEER will explain how regulators see the issue. I'm very proud that Klaus-Dieter Borchardt will also join this session because he is, first of all, the big friend of Florence School of Regulation, but immense expert on regulation. And also I'm glad that from energy community, Karolina Cegir will join, because the energy community is very clear part of EU energy policy. It's not different. At the same time, it has its own identity. So they should be with us. And then the block of industry. Industry does a lot, but the industry will definitely be impacted. And we have Mahatan Satyamurthy from BP, Francisco de la Flor from Enagás GIE, and Eva Hennig from Thüga Eurogas. And conclusions will be done by our co-host Dagmara Drogsma. So saying said this, we could already go to the first speaker, and without further hesitation, Kitti, the floor is yours, because proposal comes from the European Commission. We have no one else who could comment. And we got a question already in the preparation. What is the timeline of methane emission legislation in EU? Is it a general idea or a concrete plan? So I think you will explain quite clearly about this concrete plan. Kitti.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andris. And indeed, I found the title of the conference very intriguing. So is the EU ready for methane legislation? Which of course begs the question, is the Commission ready to propose legislation? And I can already confirm that indeed we are working full speed on the legislation. So we are planning and we were planning to adopt it by the end of this year. So we hope that we can keep the pace. I don't hide, it's a lot of work and it's uncharted territory to some extent, but the good thing is that there are many things that we can build on and many inputs that we are getting. So we are advancing. But maybe just to say a couple of words, indeed, Andris, you've already very well outlined the context and why methane reductions are important. But maybe just also to say for the Commission, what prompted us to adopt the methane strategy, it was also the realization that in order to get to climate neutrality by 2050, it is not enough to reduce just the CO2 emissions. We also have to deal with the second biggest greenhouse gas, that is methane. So this realization has accelerated also action on our side and reflection on our side, how we can deal with methane emissions. So our strategy covered the 3 sectors, the 3 main sectors of anthropogenic methane emissions, and that's agriculture and waste alongside of energy. And of course, the EU has already done a lot in the waste sector, so there's a lot more enforcement needed, but basically we have cut significantly our emissions from the waste sector. There is also plans on how to deal with the agricultural emissions, but it is actually in the energy sector, as you said, and in particular the oil and gas sector, where we have the highest cost-effective potential to cut methane emissions. And this is even more true the higher the gas prices get, the most cost efficient the measures become. So the energy sector is clearly the focus, but not only the oil and gas sector, because we also know that coal mines are actually among the biggest single source emitters, especially in Europe. So we also wanted to look at the emissions, not only from the oil and gas sector, but also from coal mines. So where do we start when we want to draft legislation and also a strategy? We start from what is the available information, and what we know, what distinguishes methane so much from CO2 is that the emissions are diffuse. So we know where CO2 is emitted. It's emitted in large installations, where fossil fuels are burned, but methane can escape at any place of the value chain. So what we need indeed is accurate information on how much methane and where exactly methane is emitted. And this is necessary to very well be able to target policy and regulatory action. So that's why the very first pillar of our reflections and of our proposal will be a reliable and robust monitoring, reporting, and verification system in order to get an accurate picture where methane is emitted within the EU in the first place. And luckily, especially as far as the oil and gas sector is concerned, we do have voluntary initiatives industry who has developed and is developing very robust systems. And I would like to cite the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership that we will come back to, I understand, with the successive speakers. And these are all principles and methodologies that we are looking into in order to build on them in our proposals. But at the same time, of course, we don't want to wait until we get the perfect data, because we would like to take immediate action to mitigate those methane emissions as well. So we are looking also in direct actions that we could incorporate, and that is especially in the fields of leak detection and repair. So today there are very good technologies already out there that can facilitate leak detection and repair, and they're very cost effective as well. So we would like to harness this availability of technologies to put some obligations on leak detection and repair. And the second area is to work on venting and flaring, so to reduce indeed venting, or to really just to reduce it to absolutely unavoidable situations, and also to act on flaring to improve the efficiency of flaring wherever flaring needs to take place. So these are the actions which are in a way actions that are those that can directly mitigate the methane emissions and do not require at this stage already that we have the perfect data to start with them. So we have launched a public consultation for our legislation. It was a very detailed one, and luckily we got very, very good feedback. So we did get lots of also information on several parts of our plans outlined in the strategy. And we have also gotten a strong support and backing for the actions that we are planning. So we are very grateful for all those, and to all those who have contributed to this. So this is what we would like to do within the EU. Now, Andris already highlighted that of course is not enough, because the EU, within the EU, the emissions are relatively a small share in the global context. So we are very, very much looking into what action can be taken in the international context, because the EU is one of the biggest, is the biggest gas market, so gas import market, and also very, very much highly reliant on oil imports. So we also are importing, in a way, the emissions with the fossil fuel that we are consuming within the EU, but that has been produced upstream outside the EU. So we would like to tackle this as well. And of course, there is the first line of action, which is international engagement, to really work with our partners and to bring them along the same way of regulation and concrete action. And the Global Methane Pledge was already cited, which was a common action between the EU and the US to reach out to global partners and to sign up to the pledge. But already the G20 Energy and Climate Ministers communique had a very important paragraph on methane, and that also confirms that the political attention towards methane is growing. And of course, we are looking eagerly towards Glasgow and the COP to see which further international action can be brought on board. So we have intensified and are intensifying our diplomatic outreach. But at the same time, we are also looking what can be put into legislation, and the reflections are very, very actively ongoing. And we will be very interested to hear the views also today. What is for sure, we would like to increase transparency. So transparency on the market, because transparency is the first step based on which market players can reasonably act. So that is the very first step that we are confident that we can take. But then what other legislative action can be still taken still needs to be explored, and we are very much in the discussions, and I'm looking forward to hearing your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Kitti. Very clear, but just to the skeptical part of the audience. So the proposal will be tabled by the Commission. Yes, and most probably this year.
So I cannot, of course, prejudge the decision by the College of Commissioners, as you know best, but we are working with full speed on tabling on a proposal by the end of this year.
So as clear as understood, so we have a proposal. Now, that means that for co-legislators, there's most probably work coming, and definitely they are starting already to prepare. And I'm very glad that Nicolás, González, Casares from European Parliament joined us. He's following this issue quite a long time, and with his pleasure, I would now pass the floor to Parliament. Is Parliament waiting for this proposal?
Thank you, Andris. The Parliament is not only waiting for this proposal, the Parliament is working on a resolution for the methane strategy. So we are working on methane by now. Thank you to the Florence School of Regulation and also the Environmental Defense Fund for inviting me to stay here today to this event, and thank you to all the participants. First, I want to mention that the last CPCC report has highlighted that human-made methane emissions are responsible for at least 25% of today's global warming. Cutting methane emissions represents a crucial opportunity in the fight against climate change. Since my last participation in the Florence School and previous meetings, we've had several developments in the legislative process. We have the Fit for 55 report, such as the IPCC, and the ITRE opinion on the methane strategy, and also the report in the ENVI committee. In addition, we expect in December, the Commission said that it will be in December, the proposals on reducing methane emissions in the energy sector and the revision on the third energy package for gas. Ahead the COP26, there have been already important announcements, such as the global methane pledge, as USA and EU initiative to reduce global methane emission by at least 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. We can see that methane emissions are playing an increasingly important role in policies against global warming. I think the Commission strategy was a good starting point. First of all, because it addressed one of the main problems of methane, the difficulty of knowing the actual emissions of this gas. The first thing to do is move forward with the standards that allow us to measure, report, and verify. We need to have a better understanding of the problem, but lack of good data should not prevent us from acting now. With current inaccurate data, it is estimated that 19% of human-made emissions in the EU come from the energy sector. And you mentioned before, Andris, that the EU, as the world's largest importer of fossil fuels, has the responsibility and the strength to promote the reduction of energy-related methane emissions globally. It would be necessary, as a member of the Parliament, I think that it would be necessary to establish clear policies with measurable objectives and in coordination with exporting countries. You know that many of them are developing countries or neighbor countries to the EU. We must take into consideration the geopolitical implications of the measures taken. Internationally agreed verifiable system of verifiable source emission in the oil and gas sector with comparable standards. I think also that it's necessary legislation to avoid leaks and eliminate routine venting and flaring in the energy sector, covering the full supply chain up to the point of production. Also, abandoned well sealing plants in fossil fuel extraction areas should also be considered. I think that the recent opinion of the Industry and Energy Committee goes in this direction, but I will mention, we'll tell you about this broad agreement that we have in both committees, MB and Nyitrai by the moment. I want to mention also that we have to take a view of the agriculture sector. I think the common agricultural policy is a powerful instrument to achieve this, by promoting organic farming and extensive livestock farming, reduce the emissions associated with this sector and should be encouraged. And I think it's also an opportunity for the rural world to control emissions in waste management. I think the strategy and the Nyitrai opinion also propose stimulating the production of sustainable biogas to avoid methane emissions from waste. As I said in other occasions, I think this is a win-win solution, and it can also generate additional revenue streams for farmers and provide opportunities for development and investment in rural areas. I want to mention about the work that we are doing now in the different committees of the European Parliament, because last July we have reached a compromise between some groups, EPP, SD, Renew, ECR, and the compromise text includes several of our proposals and priorities. For example, the compromise asks for developing a third-party verification system to assess and verify the emissions data across the entire supply chain. We have also managed to ask for specific measures to address the methane leaks from super emitters, including petrochemical sectors. And for example, in the MV committee that is going to be voted next Monday, 27th, the next Monday, in the MV committee, with a broad agreement among the main groups, EPP, SD, Renew, and also the Greens are going to support most of the compromise, since that, for example, when it comes to legislation, to the forthcoming legislation, we propose to ask an overarching and binding legislative framework on methane emissions, and also fully respecting the polluters pays principle, and also acts to make all fossil fuel imports into the Union conditional on their compliance with EU regulations. So we have also some points about agriculture, biogas, but I think I have enough time to explain what is the work that we are doing in the Parliament, and go ahead with the next participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now would like to pass the floor to Slovenian Presidency. Urška Dolinšek is definitely very, very busy now, and we are very grateful that Urška, you join us in formal Council of Ministers in Slovenia. I doubt that they talked about methane, but definitely Presidency need to care about everything, and also about methane. Urška, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andris. And yes, it is busy but interesting times, as it is for every presidency, I'm sure. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Having listened to the previous speakers, I don't have much to add in terms of why we need to have this legislation. So I don't think there is any doubt actually that this legislation is coming, that it will be needed. What we need to discuss from the side of the council, obviously, is when we'll get the proposals on the table, and I'm looking here to the commission, and then how we will deal with it. So in terms of when we'll get it, I think it's by the end of this year. As you know, our presidency runs to the end of the year, so the plan is to obviously start discussions as soon as we get the proposal. It is what we consider part of the larger Fit for 55 and also our climate goal framework. So it's in line with all the main priorities that we have as the presidency, but also I'm quite certain as the council as such. We have committed ourselves as the union to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and methane being one of those very potent gases in this respect. I think it's quite clear that we will deal with this as soon as possible. I expect us to start the presentations but not continue much in this year. The majority of the work will be left for the next year, but that's just timing wise. As I said, mostly it will be left for the following presidency. We'll see how much the French who follow us can do, because they will still have a lot on their plate. We won't be able to conclude much. However, we are working on the TENI regulation, so we'll try and clear that off the table at least. I only wanted to add one extra thing, is that also the need to stress the international aspect of reducing methane emissions. And this was actually recognized by the Council conclusions from January on climate and energy diplomacy, where the Council calls for, among other things, methane initiatives on the international scale, and the Commission and the External Service have now followed up on this with the methane pledge that was already talked about. So that I think kind of gives you a short overview of our planning and our expectations. Perhaps it's good to highlight again that this methane pledge hopefully will really be delivered at COP26. We are all working on it, so let's hope. And I think it is very important that EU maintains our role model, shall we say, in terms of climate change fight on the global scale. With this, there's not much that I can add to what my colleagues have already said, so I'll leave it here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Urška. I have already two questions here. By nature, it's more for Kitti because the proposals still need to be tabled. One question is from Irina Kusto. She asks, regarding international engagement on methane, what is the current state of engagement with Russia? Kitti.
Okay, so well, for this I probably would need my international colleagues from the EAS and the international department, because they are leading on the international outreach. But from what I can say, without going into the details, is that there is a lot of multilateral action ongoing. So multilateral indeed in the context of the methane pledge, so teaming up with the US, trying to motivate as many other countries to join, and that should indeed culminate at the COP26, hoping to reach as many countries as possible and to convince them to sign up for the pledge. which is a very, very important step of engagement. There are also processes ongoing in the G20 context. So there's been already a paragraph in the communique of the ministers in the summer, and we are looking we are working together with all our partners so that it could be lifted up one more level to the G20 summit end of October as well. So there is a lot of multilateral outreach ongoing. And of course, with those countries with whom we have bilateral dialogues or bilateral meetings, we are also raising the question. Now, of course, with Russia, as you know, we do not have a currently ongoing energy dialogue. So there is no particular bilateral action ongoing at the high level.
Thank you, Kitti. Nicolás or Urška, would you have something to add or not? From my side, what I could add, definitely Russian president on higher level has expressed also support for this issue. Russia is still not part of global methane pledge, but it will still need to be launched. So there is still time really that Russia join, and I hope that it will join, and that will be good format really to work together to cut methane emissions. So let's see what Russia will decide before COP26, but there is still quite substantial time. Second question is, again, I think it's for Kitti. Is it likely that methane regulation for imports, so going quite far, this question from Max Goodbroad, will follow the CBAM model? It's a carbon border adjustment mechanism for some who don't follow this abbreviation business. Or are there other models? Kitti, what could you answer to this question?
I was kind of hoping for a question where I could also mention IMEO, the International Methane Emissions Observatory, which I forgot to mention in my first intervention. So I hope that somebody will ask a question about that, and then I would hand it over to you, Andris, of course. But now coming back to the concrete question at hand, I cannot say at this stage, not only because I cannot, well, I'm not allowed to, but also because we haven't yet fully decided what will be in the legislative proposal by the end of the year. Maybe if I just may comment on the CBAM proposal, of course, that's what the Commission now tabled as part of the Fit for 55 package, or the legislative package delivering the Green Deal in July. The carbon border adjustment, it's a first. It's unanimity. And it's really the first time that we put something like this on the table. So let's see how that goes. And at the later stage, many things can be considered. But at the first stage, I think before copying a model, we should be seeing how it works. But there are many options, and I'm sure that the subsequent speakers will come back to that. There are many options how the international side could be tackled, but I cannot say towards which option we are now orienting.
Kitti, I have two other questions, and any from panelists could answer it. One is from Dr. Katya Yefimova. Could you please elaborate on the default value proposal? So if somebody could take. And second, from Miriam Hamani, how will the success of the implementation of the global methane pledge and any other EU international diplomacy on methane be measured? Yeah, who would like to take? Or should I repeat the questions, please? One is about default value, but I don't know if it will be in the Commission proposal. So Kitti, if you could say, and for the second, it is how to measure international diplomacy. So that, I think, is also a tough question. I never heard about good methodology, but here perhaps we can have this.
For the second one, I think that it's very difficult answer. But I think the the best way to measure is that we get reducing methane emissions. I think this is the best proof that we can have into EU international diplomacy. But who really knows how to do it? It's a question for the external service of the EU, I guess.
Yeah, if no one from panelists would like to take what my reading is on this for default values, so at this stage it's still not on agenda. So I think Kitti was very clear on the issues where proposal could come, but default value is very much related to IMO work. So Kitti mentioned it's International Methane Emission Observatory. It should somehow bring the data that we have for many streams in one place and make a strong credibility of it, and then it's quite easy to really go and find out what default values should be used for the countries that don't have methane legislation. And also it relates a bit also for the global methane pledge. We need some accountancy of what is a baseline in 2020, and different countries at this stage could definitely say different things. The best, I would say at this stage, it's IEA methane tracker. That gives very clear indication, but it's questioned by many countries. If you ask them directly, they would say, no, it's not exactly what we think about it. So we would need, again, IMEO should do this and by 2030, with the same methodology applied, we would know what we have achieved. So I would say that's quite important to be done, but IEA has also good fundamentals. They made major things already in place, and all actors would be well advised, like Norwegians did, asking the methodology IEA applies. Is it correct or not? I know that some challenges it, but I have not heard anybody doing it publicly. So at least at this stage, it's more lip service to it, but I hope it will change. If I may to ask, and ending this session, to Nicolás and to Urška, which issues could be the most controversial in Parliament and also in the Council? Because from somebody who is more from academia looking, MRV, well, it should not anybody make a big worries that you have data and correct data all across the union. Regulation on venting and flaring, natural, it should be done, because otherwise you have different standards and you emit in one country if you don't do in another. And then also on the issue of LDAR, it's also quite clear that you need to apply measurements and also actions on the spot, and this is a practice used in many places. I could guess one that member countries perhaps would say, why EU is doing, we can do it ourselves without any EU's pressure. Or Parliament perhaps will go even further, asking for more stringent regulation. So what is your expectations according to your stakeholders? I mean, Nicolás, members of your Parliament, and Parliament always brings surprises, that's I know, and is very demanding. And member countries usually are quite skeptical about any proposals that comes. Do you expect a big challenge in the adoption of the proposal?
About the proposal of the Commission, first we should know, but I think that each member state has its particularities with regard to the methane emissions. I think that that we can expect, for example, for the Parliament, is asking for more binding measures and binding proposals when it comes to the imported gas, or even when it comes for the methane emissions in the agricultural sectors. I think that we can see the significant leap from the Commission proposals in the sharing regulation to reach 55%, and I think that we can go further. I think that the EU should advance in this specific regulatory framework on methane on different areas, but I think that the Parliament would be very, very strong on how to implement and measure all the things that we are going to do in future, and the things that we are going to do also not only inside the EU, also the things that must be done outside the EU.
Thank you. Urška, how do you see from your side?
Thank you. Yes, your introduction was, you've spoken as someone who has some experience with dealing with the member states as well. The general feeling that I have in the council is that obviously we all agree on our final goal. What we usually disagree is what the paths should be, because there are national circumstances. Member states usually want to have some more flexibility on determining where exactly to target certain measures and where there should be some more flexibility. You gave an example before. You said, for example, how do you measure these things? You said, well, one good example is the IEA tracker. However, some countries dispute that because they have different data. So it's similar in the EU as well. But that does not mean that there is no intention of actually making progress. It's those things on how do you measure it? What is the baseline? How do you determine the baseline? You know, it's the things where the influence is on the actual national data or the national flexibilities. And recently, I don't know about the methane proposal, obviously, but in the proposals that have now been tabled by the Commission, there is a feeling that there is a lot of detailed legislative measures for each member state, and the feeling is that it's too detailed and does not leave enough flexibility for member states, because there are lots of difference between member states. So those are some of the things that the Commission needs to address, but I'm sure the Commission actually knows these things already. So we'll see how far they will be able to take this into account before proposing tabling the proposal, because obviously they have to make it a coherent whole as well. And then of course we come to this member states need flexibility, whereas the EP wants to have much more accountability by member states. But fortunately that's for the other presidencies then to handle on this issue. Thank you.
I saw that Nicolás raised his hand, but I think, Urška, you've partially answered what Parliament's reaction could be. So, Nicolás, would you like to add something?
I would like to add something, that we are in a moment that when it comes to energy sector and also electricity and gas prices, in a delicate moment. And the proposal from the Commission is going to come to the Parliament and the Council on December. I guess that on December, we won't have this pressure that we are having by now in the electricity and the gas prices, because it's going to be very difficult to deal in the geopolitical way, in geopolitical issues on this moment, to reduce not only methane emissions, to put more pressure in the gas producers. I think that it's going to be a point. And you mentioned that Slovenia is not going to be the presidency in this moment, and you are lucky because that.
Thank you. I would like to thank Kitti and Urška. You would like to add? Yeah, please.
No, I just wanted to clarify. It's because we are already dealing with so many things that's why I said I'm lucky. It doesn't mean that we don't want to discuss it. We just want to make it absolutely clear.
Thank you. I would like to thank Kitti and Urška and Nicolás. Basically, message from political side is very positive. It's clear understanding the proposals needs to be tabled. It's clear understanding that it will be adopted. How it will be discussed, it's too early to predict at this stage, but there is not enormous controversy, what at least concerns fossil fuels from what I hear. But now we are moving to more tricky side. Commission could make proposal, legislators can adopt, but it should be implemented in the best possible way. And usually it starts that, well, first of all, then there is procedure for not sufficient transposition of legislation, then there is an extra procedure for implementation, and after a couple of years of struggle, it starts working. And I think this time should be avoided, but it very much depends on regulatory mechanisms in places and regulatory responses and activity from regulators really to start from day one to implement it. The legislation. And now moving to regulators, I would start with Marco Lacognata. He is from ARERA. ARERA is one of the really front runners in discussing these issues for some time, but also he also participated in SEER work on general regulatory approach towards or proposed how it could be regulated. So Marco, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andris. Good afternoon. Yes, indeed, we are very active in addressing this issue also from a regulatory perspective. In this regard, please let me remind you that as CER and jointly with ACER, we recently published a paper in July covering the main regulatory positions on the topic of methane emissions based on the consultation by the Commission, and the paper focuses is organized along the main areas of intervention, like for instance monitoring, reporting, and so on, and is part of the work of CER on the Green Deal. So you also will find other papers on related topics. So today I will, instead of giving you a summary of the paper, which you can find, I would like to make a reflection based, of course, on the content of the paper, but I would like to make a reflection on the role of regulators, on the role that they can play in this context. And I think that the role can be, let's say, summarized along two main areas. The first one is the area of information. So what can regulators do to improve the information on methane emissions, and why information is so important, also for the better design of policy instruments. The second main area in which regulators can have a role is how to ensure that the most cost-effective and cost-efficient measures are undertaken. And this strictly relates to the way in which, for regulated businesses, because that's of course what we are focusing on, a special segment, a very particular segment of activity, which is the regulated businesses in specifically regulated infrastructures. So that issue relates to how we include the costs related to methane emission activities for regulated businesses. How do we recover such costs within the system? So first of all, let me say that when we assess the starting point, serving the NRAs, we noted a different degree of involvement of NRAs on this topic. NRAs are directly involved only in some cases. And why is that? Because methane emissions have often been regarded as something related to safety. So on one hand, the institutions dealing with methane emissions, for instance, which impose standards or are imposing standards, are not the energy regulators. They are other kind of institutions dealing safety standards in broader terms, not only, for instance, not only for the gas sector, but also for other sectors. And even when the environmental aspects is considered, sometimes it is not the NRA which has to, for instance, collect data, but there could be other kind of environmental, governmental agencies that foresee this data collection where is present. So today, NRA is always often regarded methane emission activities as normal business by operators. Now, of course, the picture is changing and needs to change because, of course, we are aware of the importance of mitigating emissions not only for safety but also for environmental purposes, and also because the expected amount and the expected amount of intervention is significantly higher than before. So it's perfectly it's needed some increased regulatory oversight over these kind of activities. So when I refer to the role of regulators, first area is the role of information, and the point is that we feel that we don't have enough information, or we don't have reliable information, even when we have some information on, for instance, the amount of methane emissions. This is hardly verifiable. However, information is key because it's fundamental to design certain policy instrument, in particular performance-based instruments. So the main area in which we see some potential improvements, of course, is the one of information gathering, and that's why we are supporting the Commission initiatives to establish mandatory monitoring and reporting requirements, possibly with a common methodology and within a common framework, because that would help. And of course, also regulators are let's say, a long history of collecting data and information from regulated businesses. So they could also play a role in this respect. Of course, this reasoning on information should also take account the principle of proportionality, because we deal with businesses that are very different at the European level. So we have to deal with small as well as bigger companies having very local assets like storages or LNG versus companies that manage like transmission or distribution networks, which require very different approaches in, for instance, in monitoring the emissions. And also we deal with companies that have different reputational incentives. Like, for instance, we have companies that do put weight and do consider their environmental reports and do place a great value on transparency, while others seem less concerned about that. So in this respect, we, when gathering information, when collecting information, we should take into account those specificities, and also possibly by requiring different levels of details according to the different businesses and degree and amount of emissions that are expected. The other topic is the one on the type of activities and initiatives that are performed by regulated entities, how to ensure that they choose over the best option. Of course, regulators usually have two options when they have to achieve a certain goal. One is to directly impose certain requirements. In this case, that would mean imposing safety standards or the installation of certain equipments, or like monitoring activities on a regular basis. And this certainly, it can be done. it can be very effective, especially in some cases, especially in cases where for instance, the technological solutions are less disputed. However, there's also another option which can be also considered, which is to give the incentives to the regulated businesses to find the best solution. So it wouldn't be the regulator who chooses, but it would be the businesses. Now, in this respect, we see that infrastructural operators, it is true that, as also the Commission says, they do not own the gas, like transmission company do not own the gas that it transports. So apparently there is no, let's say, direct responsibility over the reduction of emissions. However, regulators can place some sort of responsibility on regulated businesses. And for instance, one way to do that would be to set the level of allowed revenues, of allowed losses, to a standard level based on standard emission factors. In that way, the companies would have an incentive to outperform the standards, so to reduce their emissions below certain thresholds. And by doing that, they would be also able to choose the best way to achieve that outcome. So without the NRA or any other entity imposing any specific requirement. Of course, these kind of incentives, as I stated before, they highly rely on information, and they also have to be set consistently with all the regulatory measures and the ways in which other our allowances are granted, like the way in which, for instance, the unaccounted for gas is considered. Now, I don't want to go into the technical details, but just to let you know that, of course, this is a very complex matter, but still it is a matter that it's worth considering, and that regulator are willing to consider also, because this issue of cost efficiency and cost effectiveness in the choosing of the best options is at the core of their responsibilities and tasks. So to conclude on this aspect, I think that the main takeaway is that, of course, regulators are very willing to are well aware of the challenge that we have ahead of us, and of course the costs that regulated businesses are going to have. They will be part of the costs that are covered through the tariff system. However, we should not forget that that efficiency is also key, and there could be tools in the hands of regulators to achieve this outcome. So those are the main takeaways. I know that the challenge is tough, but that's what we are working on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marko. It was really very clear presentation. There was a question about the paper, where the people could get access to the paper. I will ask my colleague Maria to find the link, but you can always find it on CER webpage or ACER webpage, but we will provide you with direct link. Now I would ask Klaus-Dieter Borchardt to get on this issue. Klaus-Dieter has immense experience in regulation, with all the positive and negative sides, I think, with European aspirations and national implementation. And I'm very much looking forward, Klaus-Dieter, what you have say on this regulatory challenge that you anticipate on this methane issue. Your floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Andris, and good afternoon, everyone. After having listened to the previous speaker, it's becoming more and more difficult to add something new to it, because we are a bit discussing the same issues. What I therefore try to do now in the coming minutes is also to pick up what Kitti has already said. I am, compared to her, in the comfortable position that I have left the Commission and I'm a free thinker now, and I can maybe also give the one or the other complementary element that I see being necessary for a very robust regulatory framework that we are needing for the methane. And then also what Marco said is maybe something that I would like to start with, because he has rightly pointed to the fact that you have a regulated business behind, and you have, let's say, a market business, companies, and you cannot address them in the same way. So that means Marco has rightly explained what the NRAs can do with the regulated activities, but that would not help for the rest. So therefore, the legislation is important. So, and here I see something to be judged also by the Commission, to what extent the Commission wants to lay out a common framework for the regulated and non-regulated activities, which has to apply to everybody, and then maybe delegate certain elements specifically for the regulated business, leaving that to the NRAs, and then to see how to match that then for the non-regulated business. So here is already the first interesting questions from the way the legislation will be set up. But let me go through the different points that have been raised partially. I will complement it, as I said, with also some others. So first of all, I think it is important to have a clear idea about the scope of the regulatory framework. And if we want to effectively reduce the methane emission, it is clear that the regulatory framework has to cover the entire energy value chain, which includes production of natural gas, gas associated with oil production and handling, gas transmission, distribution, and consumption, but also the emissions from active and decommissioned coal mines, as Kitti rightly mentioned already. And the particular attention requires the import of natural gas, because the biggest part of the problem lies in the upstream segment of the EU gas supply chain. And therefore, this is also to be looked at. So now the measures for the domestic energy sector that we can see. First, I can pick up of what Kitti has already mentioned. There are three. There are the compulsory measurement, reporting, and verification, the MRV coming first. And this, of course, is, in my view, the first key challenge that has to be settled in the right manner. And I think Kitti has said that also, and I think that's the right approach, that one should build upon the oil and gas methane partnership, the OGMP 2.0. And here it is clear that maybe to explain some, there are in this area, you have three tiers. The first tier is tier 1. It's a very basic approach where you work with estimated, simple estimation of data and emission factors. And on the other side, the tier 3, there you have the most demanding approach in terms of the methodology that comes and for the data requirements. And then the tier 2 is a mixture of the two. Because already today in the European Union, the member states are already reporting at tier 2 and some in tier 3 level, I think it is important to harmonize that and go for the highest tier here. And if one follows the tier 3, then we will get a very accurate MRV system, relying on detailed reports, detailed study of equipment, and also the application of the most updated emission factors. And this throughout the value chain. And that's exactly what we need. That leads me to the second element under this measure, which Marco has said, information. It is absolutely vital that we get the reported data on methane emissions public. That should also be in the legislation. Now, some of these data might be sensitive or contain sensitive information. And here it would be necessary, as Marco has said, that at least also those information should be available for the competent authority or independent verifiers. So in authorities like the NRAs, for instance. And talking about verifiers, it's the third element that, in my view, in this context is important, is we need a third-party verification system. And that should be developed to assess and verify the emission data across the whole supply chain. I know that this is thought through for the international side. I come back to that, but I don't think that it is enough. We also need such a system within the EU. The second measure is then the leak detection and repair of leaks from all fossil gas infrastructure, but also other infrastructure that produces, transports, or uses fossil gas. Here, the issue is really that what Marco said. I also wanted to go deeper into it, but now I can summarize it. And that is, at least for the regulated activities, whether the NRA recognizes the investment that is necessary as allowed costs of the network. And some people, or some voices I have heard, have said, oh, but that's very easy now. The Commission could simply instruct the NRAs to do so, but the Commission cannot do that. The Commission cannot instruct member states, that member states then oblige the NRAs to recognize these investments as allowed costs, because the NRAs are independent. And this independence prevents such a way to instruct from the EU level through the member states to the NRAs. If the Commission wants to do something on this, it has only the possibility to identify and to define the abatement measures. So defining the measures that the Commission would put on the operators, and then if you have defined these measures, then of course one could also say, and this should go into the allowed costs. But if the Commission remains only at the surface by imposing an obligation, for instance, to improve the leak detection and repair of leaks, that would not be sufficient. Then to say all what comes in there should go also into the allowed costs. What the Commission can do in any circumstances is that the Commission could encourage the NRAs to do this, and also to invite the NRAs or ACER to find a common framework under which these investments would be defined, which then would lead to recognizing the costs. The third thing was the venting and flaring. I think here, Kitti was very clear, and I share that. Intentional venting or flaring should be simply prohibited. And this by preventing gas suppliers to place fossil gas on the market where venting and flaring occurs during the production and processing. There should be one exception, of course, and that is that there is evidence that the limited use of flaring is done for legitimate purposes, and that can be safety testing or safe disposal of harmful gases, for instance. I would now just add a couple of other measures that, in my mind, could also help here to get to a robust regulatory framework. The first is research, development, and innovation. This is, of course, needed in order to push for a rapid implementation of fit-for-purpose technologies and best available practice in order now to improve all three streams, the MRV, the leak detection and repair, and also the venting and flaring. Here, I could see the mobilization of Horizon Europe funds that could be used for that. And what is also important in my view is to make sure in the framework that the costs of pollution should not be passed on to citizens, but the polluter pays principle should fully apply in this context. The other measure that comes to my mind are performance standards. And actually, there are strong voices out there that are asking for the development of methane performance standards applicable on all gas sold in the EU gas market, including imports, and enforceable by 2025. I think this idea stems from your co-host, who has put that out there. And I tend to support this because, as I said, also including imports, because there is the main problem. And without these performance standards, I do not think that you will get to a very, let's say, complete system that will deliver in the short period of time that is needed for the delivery the results that we all wish. Because if we go down the route of setting these performance standards would enable the creation of a mandatory EU-wide methane certification system, which then would again incentivize EU gas buyers to cap their emissions at the level of the performance standards. And that they could do by reducing the volumes of imports if they are not compliant with the standards, or they just switch to another more responsibly produced gas and or decarbonized gas. So such a system, I think, could be built on the existing guarantee of origin system that we have already in place. Another element I would really mention only is if we want to render the monitoring, reporting, and verification standards complete in a complete way, we have to render them also mandatory for industrial facilities. And here we have already at EU level mainly 3 acts which need to be amended as well in order to bring the fugitive methane emission issue under the scope of these acts. The first is the Industrial Emission Directive, which is the main instrument at the EU level regulating pollutant emissions from industrial installations. The second is the European Pollutant Release and Transfer Register. Here, currently, we have 91 pollutants registered, including greenhouse gases. And here, the scope needs to be extended to fugitive methane emissions. And then the last one that comes to my mind is the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. And that could also lead to the development of non-financial reporting standards. And last but not least, but Kitti has mentioned it, yes, we should also look at the active or unused coal mines and abundant oil and gas sites within the EU. And here also all methane emissions need to be eliminated. The Initiative for Coal Regions in Transition is a very good tool in order to work out some best practices recommendations, but one could also imagine that some legislative interventions are needed. Last point that I would like to make is now the measures for imports. It is clear, and if you look at the fugitive methane strategy of the Commission, there it is nicely explained that in the first step, the Commission really looks for a diplomatic outreach first and tries to convince, as Kitti has already explained, to convince fossil fuel producing countries and companies to become more active and also joining the OGMP as a good basis for development. It is also foreseen that the EU Commission is ready to help these countries that are willing to do so and give technical assistance in order to improve the methane regulatory framework in these countries with regard to the monitoring, reporting, and verification. I think that's a very good thing. But it is also said in this strategy, and now we are coming to the point also that you have raised, Andris, if there is no significant commitment from the international partners, what the strategy, the Commission strategy paper says as a consequence of this is the Commission will propose to use the default value for volumes entering the EU gas market from countries that do not have adequate measurement, reporting, and verification systems in place. So what does that mean? Andris, you have already said it is already questionable how to define this default value. I think this is an idea that can be followed through, but you need to have the underlying data. And as long as you do not have the data, I don't think that you can pick a default value just like that. So here I'm wondering how one can implement such an approach if at international level the common development through the IMEO is not in place and not fully operational. How you will get to these default values? I can see it through the development of the IMEO and also the work and the verification and the collection of all the data that will be done by this organization, that you will get over time to a certain level that would then allow also to set such a default value. But right from the outset, I do not see that. And my understanding is also that the Commission is aware of that. And as you said, Andris, I am with you there, that I do not expect that such an instrument will be implemented already now in the upcoming proposal. But maybe Commission will surprise us, as that's sometimes the case. But what is important is that this IMEO idea has to really get off the ground, because Kitti has rightly said there's a lot of international diplomatic talking, but this remains talking, and it will, we know that, go into nice conclusions where you will find here and there a paragraph on methane emissions, but you need to instrumentalize a system like IMEO, because otherwise you will not get to the data that you need in order also to base future measures on it. And then my last point, because it was already said, if the use of a default value in the short term at least is not feasible, what could the Commission do? The Commission could set targets. The Commission could set standards. As I said, some of the standards I have mentioned, performance standards, have an indirect impact on importers. And that could be one thing. And then it was already asked, I also wanted to raise that. I see the carbon border adjustment mechanism as a possibility. And I don't think, Kitti, that you need to do a copy paste. You can integrate it in the one that we have, because look, what is already covered is electricity. So it is possible then that in the next revision, or in one of the next revisions of the CBAM, you could then also include such a methane standard. stop here. And sorry, Andris, that I was maybe a bit too long, but I had to improvise a bit.
No, it's always a pleasure having you, and we all benefit from your wisdom and experience. And I think you give a lot. So now I would move to Karolina Cegir. Energy community, as I mentioned, is part of EU, in my understanding. At the same time, keeping its a lot of independency. So, and there have been quite a lot of events already going on energy community. Karolina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to have opportunity to express energy community thoughts at this particular moment. So I grouped my thoughts in two slides and actually in two groups, because one is more general for all regulatory challenges, and another one is specific for the energy community. And Marco and Klaus-Dieter actually mentioned all of them. I just grouped them a bit differently. So next slide, if possible. At first, somehow, I mean, with new regulation, it might be business as usual with any new regulation when it has to be implemented and transposed by member states and by companies. So, I mean, methane emissions are not new, neither for regulator nor for the regulated companies, because this is already involved in this losses from network and level of maintenance and recognizes cost. But what will be new with this new regulation is actually this mandatory level and frequency of monitoring, of maintenance, this threshold as well. And this will require actually a lot of trust and flexibility. But I'm sure that the regulators already have a lot of flexible and reasonable tools for that. Somehow what should not be forgotten, that starting levels of different companies, it's already different. So some of them are already on or tier 1, tier 3 and aiming further on, and some they will just start to do this monitoring in sense of OGMP framework. So point here is that those who are early runners should not be too much awarded, but should not be punished as well. And those who are late comers also should not be overburdened, but not having advantages of that. So this is this regulatory role to put this all in the same pot in very balanced and reasonable way, and having also always in mind that actually all these future deadlines actually for tier 4, tier 5 levels are coming in 3 years time, 5 years time, and there are already normal tariff regulatory periods which are predefined. So all this should come together. Then from practical point of view, I mean, I think that here is crucial, not so maybe monitoring and picking up the technology, that verification system should be really very early, well-defined. So it's going to be international, national, harmonized and flexible enough in the same time to deal with very different situation in different countries. I mean, finally here, what I would like to stress that to me it seems that, I mean, fine, for to policymakers, it's clear, to companies, it's clear that actually decrease of methane emission is part of climate agenda, and that network operators and producers, I mean, all along gas chain are actually on the field of battle for this to cope with climate changes. But I'm not so sure that final customers will recognize that, and that anyhow public opinion can immediately pick up this new regulation, which most probably might result in increase of tariffs. Because one thing is polluter pays, this is fine, but network operators are not those who are possessing or producing gas, they're transported, and now they will have to maybe invest more or spend more to decrease these emissions, and I am not sure that this is recognized already with customers. So this kind of clear and timely message should be put together with new legislation in front. So next slide, please. All these issues and challenges will be for sure relevant for contracting parties and for regulators in contracting parties, but there are also some specific issues which I would like to stress here. So first, for those participants around online space, when it's mentioned energy community nowadays, everybody has in mind this renewable energy prosumers and other schemes, but this energy community where I belong is actually international organization set up 15 years ago between, I mean, with the treaty signed between the European Commission representing European Union and contracting parties which are not in European Union, but having the aim to implement the same energy acquis and be integrated in energy markets. So on the map, and this is actually why I prepared those slides, just to show the map, who are the contracting parties. So you can see them marked yellow on the spot, on the map. And those are 9, I mean, around Black Sea and Western Balkan. And here, as Mr. Piebalgs nicely said, yes, we are part of this same legal and market space, but sometimes things are not so straightforward. So energy community acquis is not automatically and in parallel the same like EU acquis. So for example, when this regulation will be adopted in European Union, it's going to be directly applicable for member states. For contracting parties, this has to pass this procedure through ministerial council. I mean, in the best case, it can be 1 year delay for setting the same obligations. From other side, as you know, and as you can see on the map, contracting parties are these gas transit countries. So when you talk about putting the standard for import countries, yes, transit countries like Ukraine or like Georgia or Moldova or Serbia with Turkish Stream are just on the way. So this is the same gas, it should be the same chain, same obligations and same measurement in a way. So those two are kind of from general perspective, but there are also some unsettled issues, and since they are unsettled, they will cause problems in future regulatory framework, I'm afraid, because not everywhere, but here, I mean, in some contracting parties, there is still non-cost reflective tariffs from different reasons, especially for distribution network, being political, being social, to keep these tariffs low. And then you are in this circle with all old network and old pipes, bad maintenance because it's not recognized sufficiently in the tariff, and then of course goes in higher losses and higher emission at the end, which is topic of today. But I am always optimist. So as in life, if you kind of recognize the problem early enough and define it properly, then you have better chances to solve it in timely manner when it comes to solution. So those were thoughts from energy community side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karolina. To close this panel, there have been 3 questions on the question desk, I will go briefly. The proposal is only fossil methane. Agriculture is well taken care note that there are emissions, but it's dealt with strategy on agricultural side and proposals if will come from agricultures. Also on the Dr. Katja Sefimova's question about imports, Klaus-Dieter, I think, gave the answer as much we can expect now. He's outside the commission, he's free to talk, but I think would be the same from the commission. And cooperation with International Energy Forum Methane Initiative, I have not heard any specific, but I assume commission is always working with any type of partners. So that's why I would say that they definitely are aware about it. And now we move to industry because, well, it's not that I don't like industry, but usually they are obstacles between the customers and politicians and regulators. So they are squeezed in between. So, and we will start with upstream. Perhaps they also feel the pressure, but perhaps sometimes less because they are international. And we are very grateful that Mahantan Satyamurthy, some of you know him as Sona, has joined us. So the floor is yours, Mahantan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk here today. So everybody knows me as Sona, and I'm going to give a view from industry. I'll speak as BP, but I think a lot of my views will be very common with a lot of the companies we work with certainly in the upstream, but also in the downstream sector. It is strange to start here. I think, as you alluded to just now, we support the EU policy. I don't find that a strange thing to say. You know, that maybe in the past has been a strange thing, but we actually want that policy from the EU to deliver what it's trying to do. We want it to be robust, we want it to be challenging, and we want it to be understanding of the constraints that industry is under. But we fully support the intention. And as per all the previous, I think pretty much all the previous speakers and panels, there's nothing I disagree with. And you'll see that when I talk through what a lot of the activity and the challenges that industry's under. Hopefully you can see the next slide. So we need to do something. I think industry needs to be active on methane, and we have been active. For example, we've been reporting methane, certainly for BP, for more than 20 years. I think, but what's happened in more recent years is we need to do it better. I think all the previous correspondents and speeches have highlighted the need to give confidence to the data. So while we were reporting, we've understood now, and we're understanding the challenge of methane much, much better. And over the last 5 or 6 years, that's starting to really evolve and starting to develop, and technology is starting to come to the fore that allows us to do this better. And we need to provide that confidence. But it's extremely difficult. It's extremely challenging. You know, for a lot of the reasons that were mentioned and maybe not be mentioned today, it's difficult to see methane. It's a complex molecule to measure. There's a lot of techniques that are out there now that are developing. But each of these challenges are also opportunities. There are opportunities for technology to advance and for companies to pilot and work together with regulators, with standards, with innovators. And certainly my point of view, the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a step change in the, you know, what's coming to the market in terms of technology. There is a challenge for industry, and it's a difficult question, and it's a series of questions we're trying to answer. Sometimes they change, but in a snapshot, we're trying to give confidence that we've included all our sources of methane. We're trying to also give confidence where unplanned events happen, where things that are not normal happen, we're able to capture those in our reported numbers. To do that, we need to improve measurement, but we also need to reduce methane or reduce our intensity, or both. The other challenge we have is we operate a certain number of assets, but we also have non-operated joint ventures, equity interest, investments in a lot more often oil and gas than we actually operate ourselves. We need to solve all of those parts. So why is that difficult? I think it's really challenging because of the technology. We're looking at, as you've maybe seen on the graphic on the right here, there's satellites, there's drones, there's aircraft, there's ground-based techniques. They're all rapidly evolving. Some of them are working now. Some of them we're piloting and testing and hoping they will allow us to move the dial forward over the next year or 2 or 3. But there's also some challenges with them. Satellites, for example, have issues working over water, which obviously has an impact for offshore operations. But those are solutions that are being worked. There are solutions starting to come and starting to close some of those issues. And obviously we support those. We want to work with those companies and work to pilot and move those technologies to become more accepted and more normal. There is a lack of standards and guidance. This is all new stuff. This is new work, new ways of working. So we need to work hand in hand with industry bodies and regulatory bodies and standard bodies to get these technologies approved and accepted. Speaking again as BP, we operate all over the globe. We have pipelines, we have offshore facilities. I have dispersed oil and gas operations in the US. What we've learned through the last few years, I need different solutions to develop the right answer for my different types of operation. It isn't one solution fits all. So it's great when we hear this flexibility. Tell me the rules, tell me the standard, but allow me to innovate, allow me to adapt and adjust solutions to reach that end goal. That's, for me, the right way forward. And that supports our ability to influence partners and bring them along this journey around understanding methane. So I think a lot of what's mentioned here has been mentioned before, and we're fully supportive of the activity around reporting, around direct measurement, and MRV being a critical building block. So nothing that was said before do we object to. We need to provide that confidence. We need to be able to verify that data and give confidence both to regulators, in this case, the EU and others, that you can believe our numbers. And we're working on doing a lot of work with that. Reductions, and it's great that, again, that was reinforced during the presentations today. It's not a measurement game. It's ultimately we want to reduce our emissions. And there's a few techniques that were mentioned in terms of leak detection and repair, flaring and venting, but also a lot more. There's a lot sort of technology that we can apply at individual source levels that we can really start designing better, designing new facilities better than old facilities, and getting that methane down to near zero levels. So a lot of work has been done in the past and needs to continue being done on reduction side. And I think you referred to the IEA in a previous presentation. Again, the abatement curves that are there. We need to develop robust real-world abatement curves. It's easy to challenge other people's curves, but industry needs to share real data, real information, and then deliver against those abatement curves, not argue around that's right or wrong, or slightly right or slightly wrong. Get more information into the public domain there. And I will highlight the voluntary initiatives. OGMP, for example, BP, alongside a number of other companies, joined the original OGMP before the EU Commission joined. But it was great that the EU Commission did join and has moved the dial significantly forward. So there's been a lot of voluntary activity the last 5 years, including regulators and governments, and sometimes just industry themselves. And that really helps. And we can do a lot more working together. We can share learnings with each other. We can hear the challenges from NGOs or from governments and regulators and work on solutions, find a common ground. And I believe OGMP, a typo on the slide, OGMP is a perfect example of industry, regulators, NGOs coming together, developing a framework which is consistent with everything I've said up till now, and then moving that forward and hopefully get more countries to join and more companies to join, and it becomes the standard, and it allows a level playing field with many companies in this space. And that was all I wanted to cover today.
Thank you very much, and especially I love this develop real-world abatement curves. I have heard so much debate with the IEA curves, about the IEA curves, that I think it is really needed to get a more common understanding, and it could come from more data from industry. I think it would be very, very helpful and it would help the whole process. Now I would ask my good friend Francisco de la Flor takes the floor. Here he is, well, from the beginnings of this methane, I would say methane quest in the EU. So Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Professor. Piebalgs. It is a real challenge just to intervene after the previous speakers with such a deep knowledge and especially just the last one with Sona with his fluency. So it is quite difficult to say things better. What I would like to share is starting with a couple of things. Marco referred to safety. Some others also referred to that. I would keep this in my mind. And also a second point, also referred by Marco, was regulated activities and regulated entities. This is completely paramount. Just to keep these two concepts in mind first. This is not new. Just from the point of view of, the industry, it's not new for the industry to address the methane emissions issue. For years and years was done for safety purposes, and I think was well done. Then commercial issues. Now is the environmental angle, and for this to address this environmental angle, in the past few years, you know, Professor Piebalgs, how deeply we are working on that, how deeply we are committed with this activity, so that and most of you, just the speakers, we know each other quite well. So we share this commitment, we share this attitude towards the reduction. So having said that, I will just use a sample, some few color slides, and then I will finish with my, let's say, my conclusion. Next, please. Next. Okay, this. Yes, a set of tools that we have in. The final goal is clear. Is just to actual reductions of the emissions, and then we have a set of tools and activities we are doing. I will start with this cooperation and dissemination. The activity, the cooperation and dissemination is absolutely paramount, because even if there are few companies are fully committed, we need to engage all the others. Then, not to go into detail, because it has been mentioned several times, the MRV and the importance of data accuracy. The absolute importance. Also, Sona said something of science and innovation and what has been done in the past 3 or 4 years, and what we try to do in the coming ones. Then a set of technical tools that we put just for all the industry and for the stakeholders. Next, please. Just to share knowledge and share best practices is absolutely paramount. Here, just a sample of papers that the specialists, those that are working for years and years in this work, together within the different initiatives, have developed a lot of papers that, of course, the standards will come. Those standards, compulsory standards, or standards more, let's say, applicable in a focused way. But until now, there are, I see here, you can see here, yes, 6, 7 papers that were produced and available in the website. So for those that are interested and they want to start just or to start implementing in their own companies, or in their increase the knowledge, you have a lot of information. One particular, I would say a couple of them, the glossary. We need to speak with the same language. So this glossary has been produced by the industry, but on other stakeholders. I think that we should, as another language, we should start just calling things with the same name. And another particular paper that we have produced, which is notably important, is the target setting, the target setting rules. We have developed a complete set of target setting, because we know that companies starting now, the newcomers do not know even how to address this topic. Next, just for this colorful approach, I say data accuracy and reporting. OGMP 2.0 has been already mentioned. And I would like to stress here these levels: level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Professor Borchardt referred to the previous way, just the previous way, the tier 1, 2, 3. Now we speak about these 5 levels. Yeah, the ambition is just to reach level 5, but to reach this level 5, as some of the I see participants in some of the audience, people in the audience are really specialists in this topic, and to reach level 5, some technological developments are completely necessary. Then this technological edge and an angle is so paramount that those that are committed from years and we were just going forward now are also trying to work together to, for instance, to test the different technologies and to go as far as we can. Then, having said that, I go to the policy asks. Next and final slide. Yeah, our views. We are regulated entities. We are account for. I mean, it doesn't matter if we account 0.1, 0. Whatever in the European landscape, but we are committed and we are doing the homework. We are doing the homework. First, I say, I repeat, I cannot stop repeating that raising the awareness and sharing knowledge is the key. Is the key to increase this understanding and also to build a culture of curbing methane emissions for all, not only for those that are committed or those that are linked. Their salaries are linked to the actual reductions. Second, already mentioned, but I have to stress a couple of points. The investments or what we spend for these techniques, MRV, LDAR, etc., mitigation measures, we request to be recognized. Marco, probably we will speak bilaterally on some of the things you said, but we will agree. Certainly we will agree. But if we are regulated, regulated, then something we should agree on the best way to implement and to recognize. Very important one for me, especially for me. The previous efforts of the gas companies, those that have taken early action in mitigation, should be acknowledged and fairly accounted for. You know that at the beginning, to start, just the reduction could be very strong at the very beginning. After 4 or 5 years, it is quite difficult just for the asymptote, so that when some people say, okay, let's go for the pledge 30% starting in 2020, what I would say, listen, we need how to allocate those efforts, because a lot of companies started before, and now that reduction of 30% is average, 60 or 70% is for probably for gas companies. It's not possible for those that started 10 years ago, but now the capacity to reduce is really small. Cost efficient and optimal methane emission reductions is to be prioritized. I'm aware that for regulators, they have their capacity to impose or to just challenge the European operators. But if the main actions are outside, what I'm always wondering whether to spend here 100 million to get 100 whatever reduction, if these 100 million could be invested elsewhere and get 10 or 20 or 100 times better results, because at the end of the day, we are speaking about a global issue. Then flexibility and recognition that one type of solution doesn't fit all. Sona mentioned this, doesn't fit all assets, operations, and equipment along the value chains. And last 2 or 3 here is the legislation, we ask please the legislation not to be very prescriptive, as technologies and methods evolve very quickly. Last two quick comments on venting and flaring. Yeah, I'm thanks Professor Borchardt for saying that there are some unavoidable parts where venting has to be done for safety purposes. So I would just ask, especially those that have to vote on Monday in the ITRE committee, just those amendments that recognize that nothing, I mean, not everything is avoidable. Please take that into consideration, and also to the Commission in the drafting of the package. This is if we are ready for methane legislation. Yes, we are ready and happy to contribute by providing also the technical expertise. The very final one is okay. When speaking about the external dimension, yeah, we are aware that the vast majority of the emissions are outside the EU territory, and then do not input additional, let's say, obligations on infrastructure operators related with this external policy that is beyond our control. This is please one request, because probably our capacity to influence will be very low. And related to this point, and let me change my hat, and now I'm consumer, not as an infrastructure operator, but as a consumer. If standards or performance standards are to be established, please take into consideration that this is not a market where we can choose among many suppliers alongside the world, and there are linkages with some of them, so that as consumer, I would ask, please do not impose measures that increase prices, notably at this time where this is so hot topics that in our countries there is a lot of debate. So if additional restrictions are imposed and prices are increased, we, the consumers, will pay those price increases. So thanks a lot. This is and again, happy to contribute, happy to participate, as we are doing and we have been doing for years. Happy to contribute to this development and to the implementation, of course. Thanks, Professor Piebalgs.
Thank you, Francisco. Eva, the floor is yours now. I see you smiling, so please.
Well, it's nice to be the last one, because you can build on anything that has been said before. So I can just add to what Francisco has been saying. Of course, as a distribution company, you are in a different situation as you are as a TSO, and that's one of the points I would like to start with. So the Thüga Group is only operating distribution grids, lots of them. So we have 90,000 kilometers of distribution grids. So we have some experience, and we are quite old. So we were founded in 1867. So I think we have a long past of operating gas distribution grids. And this is one of the points that I'm not afraid of the regulation. And I think it's good that it's going to be a regulation, because this is maybe ending some discussions on how soft it could be. What I would be not afraid, but what would be complicated if the regulation is going very much into technical details, because in all the European countries, we already have very detailed technical rules on LDAR. They are different, but this is also coming because the countries are different and the distribution grids are different. In some countries, for example, the meter is in front of the house. In the other countries, it's inside of the house. So we have different countries, we have different existing rules, and it doesn't mean that the one rule is better than the other ones. The next thing is, if we talk about LDAR, we have to make the distinction between the levels. LDAR at the upstream level is very different to LDAR at the downstream level. This means that also the discussion of what is the right technology or what is the best technology is different. For example, we are operating thousands of pressure reduction stations. We are going every year, sometimes 2 times, 3 times into those stations. So I would be happy that every time we go into one of those stations, we are measuring something. But you also know that the cameras, which are sometimes projected as being the best technology, they will cost you 100,000 euros. So when I then hear the discussion on which costs will be included in the incentive regulation, if I have 20 operators, for each one of them a camera which costs 100,000 euros, I will not be able to do this. So we have to find the right level of technology to use this to get the most of the data. And we are really willing to go there. So as Thüga, we've said, yes, we're going to go all in. We have 3 companies, 3 DSOs, which have joined the OGMP. And after 10 months in the OGMP, I can say it's a very intense experience. So sometimes I have the feeling I spend most of my time hunting for molecules. And we are just starting next week with the measurement program of our pressure reduction stations. And one of the outcomes of the preparation was we don't get the cameras, because it's not like they're all around here. All of Bavaria has 1 camera. So this means that we have to find a way. I know that within the OGMP, we have the discussion, is it proper to measure just the concentration and then recalculate it to then know how many liters it was? I think the level at the distribution is a different one than you have at an upstream. And I rather have many data than just having very high sophisticated data, which I only have once a year. And every time, maybe to explain this, every time we go into a station, we measure it. Every time we leave the station, we measure it. And we are only allowed to leave the station if there is no methane emissions. So when you do this continuously, you get a good feeling of what you have. And this is where I would like to end: target setting. A target setting, don't do target setting before you have calculated your methane emissions, because otherwise you might have the feeling, oh yes, a target by minus 40% is possible. We had the thinking that this might happen, but then we came to the conclusion, oh, we are already at a methane intensity of 0.07 until 0.1, which means we are very low with the methane intensity. If you then try to have a reduction, and this is what Francisco just called the early, those past actions of the last 30 years, we've invested so much money to get rid of all the cast iron pipes, for example. So we decreased our leaks by over 90%, the number of leaks, which means that we are already at a low level. So now we have to figure out what is the best way to reduce more. And as a gas person, the first thing is always to reduce. And even if not everybody likes that, the second thing is to know how many liters it was. So we always come from the position, get rid of the leaks as fast as you can. And so this is our position also in Thüga, that we say we want to work as much as we can within the OGMP. We want to spread the news. So we're going to have lots and lots of information that we can spread within the Thüga group, but also into the associations in Germany and also within Europe. It's a great community of the people who have joined OGMP, and I thank Francisco again and again for putting so much work into it with Tanya. So everybody is helping each other with the best experiences, but it still has to fit the purpose. So it doesn't make sense to take technology which was good for the upstream sector and try to use it at the downstream sector, because it will not be the best one and the cost will be overboarding. So this is why we have to find the right level of technology for us. That's it. As fast as I could.
Thank you. You saved my day. Well,
you're mute, Andris.
No, I think I am unmuted now.
Yeah.
So now we can go to conclusions. It was really very fascinating speeches from our participants in all the panels. I will ask now Dagmar Drogsma from our partner Environmental Defense Fund to make conclusions of this rich presentation filled day. 2 hours.
Yeah, thank you, Andris. And it's not easy, because indeed it was a very rich discussion. So, thank you to all presenters, and obviously, Andris, thank you for inviting me to do so. I will make an attempt, and I'm conscious of the time, but I do feel that it's helpful to draw some conclusions. And I think the upfront one is a very positive one, because there is clearly a lot of agreement between the different communities about the need for action on methane. And actually also on the measures to achieve that. But surprisingly, and I think that is where the presentations were really interesting, there's still quite a bit on the detail that needs to be agreed, not surprisingly. So, briefly to go to the first session, it's incredibly helpful to hear confirmation from Kitti on the legislation that will be proposed on MRV, on LDAR, and also on venting and flaring. And I was also very interested in the remarks about sort of, the need for international action, but also that there may be a need for more at the EU level, and that you raised an open question on what that could be. And I think in the other sessions, you heard lots of suggestions in terms of what more could be done. And first of all, also from a member of the European Parliament, Nicolás González, we learned that the European Parliament as a group may want the legislation to go further. And it may ask indeed for an overarching methane legal framework for all sources. So not just energy, but also waste and agriculture. So that is an important contribution, I would say. Also that the European Parliament feels strongly about the need to deal with emissions from imports into the EU. I was also interested about the input from Urška, because to me it showed that the battlegrounds actually may be within the councils. And I think Urška really rightly pointed out the differences between member states, that there's a big agreement on international action, but because member states are so different, there will be a very interesting negotiation within council. So I'm not sure we should be looking forward to that. I hope there will be unity quite early on. For me, the second session was really interesting. In my current role, or my previous role, I worked for 20 years as a policymaker and a legislator, and I worked very intensely with regulators. So I'm the first to understand how important they are in terms of things happening and enforcement and all of that. I can't completely summarize what you all said, because there were so many things that you referred to. But I definitely picked up on the role of regulators in terms of helping to improve information and data, and also how you can help ensure that measures are cost efficient and cost effective. And it's something that industry obviously also asks for. So there's an important parallel there. And the reference to proportionality, because business are different, they come from different standpoints, and I guess that is all well understood. I think some of the suggestions made in that section as to what could be done more are very valuable. Research and development and innovation, performance standards, and no surprise that my organization would support that, but also reference to the certification system and the need to amend other legislation. So that's a really interesting one, I guess, for the Commission also, that just technical legislation may not be enough, but maybe you need to look much further. I think it was incredibly helpful to have information further about the energy community, because not everyone in the audience may fully understand what the energy community is about. And also that the non-EU members in the energy community are committed to implement most of the acquis. However, that there's some challenges to that. And I expect that there may be further discussions on that. So yeah, I'd be really interested to learn even more about that. And then industry. So in my current role, I've been working with the colleagues from industry who were in the meeting. I think all of them stressed the importance of the regulation that come on and that they support what is happening, but I think they also had valuable comments in terms of focus and for example, the need for flexibility on the use of technology, also that legislation shouldn't be too prescriptive, and frankly, that is also a message that I got from the regulators side, so there seems to be some agreement on that. And a reference to the importance of sharing of best practice and building on the work that has already been done. I don't think that was just industry who said that. Everyone around the meeting had the same comments on that aspect. The last intervention was also helpful, I think. That is, if we move to target setting, that real data is important. And then we go full circle because, you know, first presentation by Kitti started with MRV. And I think I'll leave it at that because I could say much more, but overall, you know, I'm really encouraged. I do recognize that there's still some challenges that need to be ironed out, but just listening to all of you, I'm convinced that that is possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Dagmar, for excellent conclusions. From me, just left, thank you to all the speakers, all the participants. And I also recognize that it's Friday afternoon. In some places it's early, and some places it's later, but Friday afternoon in EU is quite challenging time. So thank you for participating in this very important event today. Thank you and see you at the next meeting.